I'd like to remind you can provide feedback about the talk. There's information on your ticket and also the schedule on the website. And I'd like to introduce the next speaker, Lance Cottrell, who'll be speaking about In the Crosshairs. Please give a warm welcome applause.
All right. Let's grab that. So thanks very much for coming. My interest in targeting really comes because of the last 20 years' work I've done in anonymity technologies. So I founded anonymizer.com back in '95. I built anonymous remailers. Oh, of course, you want to do something. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about how people get recognized, how people get targeted, and what kind of techniques they can use. We're just going to have fun with this. All right. All right, give me just 1 second. Get back to a screen size where I can actually see things. Just turn off all the networking. All right, that'll be back in a moment. So I want to start off just with a general question. I'm sure all of you guys, it's kind of obvious, but if you get an e-card from your mother on your birthday with a childhood picture of you on the card, on the e-card in your email, are you going to click on that link? So I see heads shaking no, but I think most people, if you get something that's sufficiently personal, looks sufficiently real, it's the kind of thing you're still going to engage with. You're gonna click on that because it doesn't sound any alarms. It's what you're expecting to see. And if you're going to a mainstream website, I mean, how many of us start the morning reading CNN, Forbes, some other website, see what's going on for the day? I think most people don't feel nervous about doing that. They feel like this is a big legitimate website. I'm not in the dark alleys of the internet. I feel pretty good about this. But of course, each one of these sites has been taken over for a watering hole attack, but not just a general watering hole attack. They've actually been used for targeted watering hole attacks, which I think just changes the entire equation of the threat model that you're dealing with. And targeting it's hard to get really good data, but it's looking like it's a significantly growing threat. So there was a great study that was done. They interviewed a couple hundred companies. They said, are you concerned about targeting? Not at all, somewhat concerned, or it's inevitable. And in 2013, 28% people said it was either a concern or inevitable. And in 2015, 70% of the companies interviewed said targeting was inevitable. So it's gone from, yeah, we see some targeting, it's a thing, but most of the threats they were getting were fairly broad spectrum, to really getting, lasered in. So this was a study of actually companies in England, but I think it probably generally applies. Over 60% of the companies surveyed said that they had been targeted in the previous year. 40% said that was successful. 20% actually lost data in the process, and 15% suffered significant either financial or reputational losses as a result of that. So this is a huge problem. These people are getting targeted, and the targeters are getting in, they're being effective against them. And the two main kinds of targeting we see are email. The reality is that, like that card from your mother, a really well-crafted phishing attack is really effective. If it's from the right person, it actually comes from your colleague's email account because they hacked his computer first. It's referring to real things. It's talking about, real situations. It's very, very difficult to get people not to fall for that kind of thing. And realistically, most of us have to click to work. You will get a link that someone sends you that you, in fact, have to follow because that's part of your job. You need to get the... It sounds just like feedback up here. And one of the things we're seeing, though, with the email phishing attacks is a real trend towards them being phishing links rather than phishing attachments, because we've done a pretty good job of training people not to click on files when they show up in the inbox, that you shouldn't be, opening bad files or suspicious files. But I think people still feel more comfortable with the links. And so we're seeing a lot more of them being the links. You go to the link, then you get exploited. And the browser really is the problem. Something like 68% of all malware is delivered through the browser. Over 90% of undetected malware comes through the browser. 5 of the most vulnerable applications, just by patch count, are all either browsers or browser plugins. Oh, God, I feel sorry for you guys. It's clearly that time of day. And they're just being patched continuously. They're enormous applications. They got huge amounts of capabilities. They're running, executing multiple programming languages. Most browsers are running something like 5 different complete programming languages inside them. This is sort of an impossible to solve problem. But why target it? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons why they want to target. The first is just success, right? If you get one of these Nigerian scams, no one's going to fall for that. You know that this is some bad situation and you're going to avoid it. Whereas, with targeting, you get an email that says, from me, saying, I really appreciate you being here at my talk, and I appreciate the questions that you're going to ask, because you're all going to ask me amazing questions, and here's the copy of the deck that you requested, and there you go. But, of course, it wouldn't be from me. It would be from the guy sitting next to you who paid attention to what your email address was. And so the targeting allows you to do that social engineering, to give that warm and fuzzy feeling when the message comes in, because it's from the right person, it's got the right information, it's referencing the right kind of context, it's job specific, it's built just for you. And so the odds of you clicking on that are going to be much, much higher. On the web, it works a little differently with the targeting. So, we're all pretty familiar with the spear phishing, but with the web-based targeting, they're getting clever in different ways. So the first one I want to talk about was an exploit against Forbes. And some hackers came in and they took over the Forbes quote of the day. So when you go to Forbes, boom, that thing comes up. They managed to compromise that and put in some malware. And they were using a couple of different 0 days to go after the people who are at the website. And those are valuable resources. But what they did was they set it up so that it would only attack certain people that they wanted to go after. In this case, it went after DoD employees and Chinese dissidents. And the reports I have seen haven't been really clear about how they were doing it, but it looks like they were doing it based on IP addresses. But only people matching the criteria they were going after actually suffered the attack. And so that's great, right? Because now, obviously, Forbes has got a company who's scanning their website, looking for malware, looking for attacks, making sure that there's nothing going on. But of course, that bot doesn't meet the criteria. It doesn't see the attack happen. Only the people who you wanted to go after see it. And then you send in your forensics team to go, oh yeah, I got infected by this. And they check the website and, they don't get the attack either. Eventually they were able to dig in and find the malware sitting there. But it allowed them to be very effective and stay active for a long time. An even more targeted attack was an APT group that was called Dark Hotel. And they went in and they did a 2-phase attack. First, they compromised mostly Asian hotel chains and went into the reservation systems. And they'd look for reservations by high-value targets. So senior government folks or senior military, senior corporate kind of people, CEO levels. And they'd realize when they were going to be staying at the hotel. Okay, and we know this guy's going to be checking in on Tuesday. They would then, and only then, exploit the Wi-Fi captive portal. And they'd go into that and hack it, because now they know who's showing up and what room they're staying in. Well, when you reach the captive portal, what 2 things does it ask you? Name and room number, right. So then they set it up to only exploit that one person. When that name and room number were entered, it would then push an exploit onto the user's machine. And these guys were willing to work pretty hard for it. They were doing a fake Windows update with assigned code base because they had brute forced a 512-bit signing cert. And they were using that to issue properly signed updates. And then the software would sit silent for 6 months. And then it would exploit you and start, exfilling all of your data and install the RAT and all that other good stuff. So extremely targeted, and took a long time for these guys to trace it down, because the malware was only resident for the short period of time on the Wi-Fi that the guy was going to be in the hotel, and as soon as they ran the exploit, they actually uninstalled it. And again, you send out your forensics teams, they don't see any of the effects you're looking for. And the water bug attack, APT, they had, I think, even another level of slickness in the way they manage the targeting, in that they do their watering hole as a two-phase target. So when you go to the website, the first time they grab a profile of your computer. They look at what browser, what operating system, what plugins do you have, what's your IP address. They do a browser fingerprint. So they capture all that identifying information from plugins and fonts and languages that allow you to uniquely identify that visitor again when they come back. And then they wouldn't do anything else. So they then get to sit at their leisure and look through all of that. What's your IP address? Where are you coming from? Do you have cookies? Do I know who you are? Can I recognize you? Are you the person I want to go after? And which attacks will work on you? And then they say, okay, yeah, that's a guy of interest. Then the next person, someone who was of interest, visits the page. Then they'd get exploited with something that was almost sure to work and would only attack that individual person based on either the browser fingerprint or the source IP address. And again, really hard to track these people. And they're able to get in and hit their targets because they've done the ground research. They know who they're going after. They know the operating system. They know what this is going to look like. So we're not now talking about sort of general watering hole attacks. This is what I've started calling the sniper at the watering hole. Because if you're sitting at the watering hole and you start shooting every antelope that walks by, two things are going to happen. One, the antelopes are going to start running because of all the shooting that's going on. And two, they're going to start noticing all the bodies piled up, right? And that's what happens with untargeted watering hole attacks. You're exploiting so many machines, so many people, you're leaving lots and lots of evidence lying around, right? Ideally, what you want to do is you want to sit back and wait for the white rhino to walk by because that's the money target, and only shoot him from, half a mile away and then get out. So the game here is to stay below the radar, right? The attacker wants to avoid notice, and he gets a lot of wins from that, right? So he delays detection. Because he's not hitting so many people, it's much harder to notice the attack. You don't see, it doesn't show up on anomaly detections because you're not getting 1,000 exploited machines, you're getting 3 exploited machines. And of course, there's a numbers game. The more machines someone tries to hit, the better the odds of you being able to recognize the attack happening with your tools. And because the odds are lower, they can now also afford to use the better tools. So that's why with, for example, with the Forbes attack, they were willing to use a couple of 0 days in there. And these 0 days are costing them, six figures plus to buy on the open market. They don't want to then have that burned in 24 hours. By using the targeted approach, they can avoid allowing that to be detected, having the signatures created, having everyone's intrusion detection systems now aware of the techniques they're using and going after it. So by being very careful about only attacking the people you particularly want, you're able to avoid that kind of detection. And you can also do more damage with a targeted attack because of the groundwork you can lay ahead of time. Right? If I'm trying to exploit thousands of people and I get 1,000 desktops, I have no idea who they are, where they are, what company they work for, what resources they might have access to. Whereas if I'm going after just you're in the crosshairs, I'm going to work out, what do you have? I know why I'm going after you. You have access to some particular piece of data. You've got money. You've got some sort of resource. I know that going in. I know what I want to get. I can go directly to that. And more importantly, I know what I'm going to do with it. I've already worked out how to monetize this asset that I'm going to get. Or I've got a whole campaign laid out to, dump all your emails on Pastebin in a certain way to do the maximum amount of reputational damage, or whatever I'm going to do with it. I can make you hurt a whole lot more as an attacker because I've been able to plan this out in advance because I know who I'm going after. So are you a target? Well, obviously if you're a high-profile individual, you're a target. Obama, target. The CEO of your company, target. But do you have access to valuable data? Right? You may be a schlub, but you're a schlub with the keys to the kingdom. That certainly makes you of interest. Do you have access to exploitable data? So the data might not be valuable, obviously, but it may be something someone can do something with. And this is one I always think about There was an attack on PR Newswire. So everyone familiar with PR Newswire? They're a press release company. You send them your press releases and they blast them out to a whole bunch of places. What could be less valuable than a press release? It's designed to be sent to every newspaper in the country, right? Except they're embargoed. Most of the press releases, you upload it and the press release gets sent out in 6 hours or in 2 days or something like that. So they hacked PR Newswire. They'd grab all the press releases while they were under embargo, find out which ones had interesting news that would likely move the stock price of the companies, and then had a huge cadre of people that would then trade on the stock. And they made hundreds of millions of dollars using this technique with these people all over the country before they, got a little too aggressive and finally got caught. Access to money, obviously, people like money. Access to networks, this is the target attack, right? If you can't get direct access to Target's network, you go after the company that does their HVAC, and you get access to their network that way. So if you have access to a network which is of interest, that may make you a target. Access to people. I think you look at the phishing attacks that really work, they're the personalized one. So if you know the guy I want to go after, and I know you know the guy I want to go after, I may exploit you just to get access to your email account so I can learn about him, craft the right email, and send it from your computer. Right? Because that's a huge win, and it makes it so much more difficult, right? You can't train someone well enough to recognize a phishing attack when it actually is from your friend's account talking about the fishing vacation you took last week and, everything else. And they go after low-hanging fruit. So if you've got weak defenses, they're looking for that. That's a huge targeting choice. So can we avoid targeting? Can you prevent the targeting from happening to you? So on the web, yeah, you actually kind of can. And this is sort of my core expertise is doing this. So you can delete your cookies, you can hide your IP address, you can scrub the persistent trackers, you can try to get rid of the super cookies, you can mask your browser fingerprint. The browser fingerprint's the tricky one because it turns out it is basically uniquely identifying of your browser just looking at what you've installed on it, your fonts, your plugins, and everything else. It's enough data points for most websites to uniquely identify you from everyone else. For that, my recommendation is a disposable VPN with a virtual machine. So if you've got an absolutely brand new, pristine VM with a browser that you've never installed anything in, no plugins, no extra fonts, that is as generic a fingerprint as you can generate and therefore gives the least information and identifying capability. The email's way worse because it's a two-way communication medium. So you actually need to give someone an address which will reach you. And so if you want to be anonymous, you now need to use an address which doesn't have anything to do with your identity or your job. And then be very careful about who you give that out to. And this becomes basically like running in full alias. You're now in deep cover all the time. And it's hard to do business in deep cover. So the problem of avoiding targeting an email, I think, is somewhat intractable. But doing it for web, dealing with these targeted, snipers at the watering hole scenarios, that's achievable if kind of a pain. So what does this mean for our defensive strategy? How do we need to be thinking about, now that we know we've got the target? I love this cartoon. It's an old cartoon. What do we need to be doing differently or thinking differently? So there's an old saying, right? You can fool some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time. And the fact that you can't fool all of the people all of the time really isn't relevant to the attacker. They don't care, right? They just need to fool some of the people all of the time. And you really can't train your way out of this. There's just enough people who click on whatever. And just say no is not a good choice either. You can't opt out of the internet. You can't, like I said, you can't choose not to open the attachment from your boss just because it might contain malware, when in fact, you're being told to go open this thing and do something with the document. So the other problem is that with targeted attacks, detection works worse when you need it most, right? Those targeted attacks are the ones that are going to do the most damage because they've thought about it. They've targeted you. They've got all these things in place. But simultaneously, this is the time when they're comfortable using those 0 days and the brand new exploit they built and the tools that they haven't used anywhere else because they are the least likely to be detected. They'll have the use of them for the longest possible time. So, the usual clarion call for next generation security, whatever that may mean. I think one of the keys, though, is got to be getting towards security against unknown attacks. And just knowing, the exploit will happen and you will not detect it. And building systems that won't kill, you don't lose everything just because you got infected, you clicked on something. I think that means instant, automated, and painless recovery, whether or not you detect things. So just making sure you can cycle all the time. And containment and damage minimization. I think we're starting to see a lot of companies doing these sorts of tools where the application that's going to get exploited runs inside some sort of a virtual machine. It's sandboxed away from other things so that when that happens, it doesn't get to run away and destroy the rest of your network and steal all your data. And user-resistant or user-tolerant design. Just because you can't trust your users are going to click things. They're going to open links. They're going to share things. They're going to reuse passwords. They're going to do all the things that we keep telling them not to do. Ideally, you want to make sure that just because someone's a human being doesn't mean that you automatically have lost your corporate security. I really like the idea of isolation for this. Isolating the application from the desktop, isolating the application from the network, making sure that when the malware attacks that application, it doesn't then get to pivot and do other things. It doesn't get to go from the browser to the email or from the browser to the file system, keeping that tightly contained. And also in the network. I mean, it's really easy to write a little JavaScript that will use WebSockets to enumerate the internal network of your target without even exploiting the browser, right? They just look at a page, and it goes and scans all the IPs on the local network, works out what the local IP space is, scans all the IPs, and returns back information about it, and then you can say, oh, that looks interesting. I want to go after that. So isolating both the desktop and the network, I think, is critical. Otherwise, you're just allowing them to go look around for soft underbellies. And I'm liking virtualization a lot for this. So the same way it helps with identity protection and your anonymity, it also helps with this kind of isolation, right? You can put the app in a box, and as soon as you're done using the app, you could burn the box down. And next time you need to use the app, you spin up the new VM, and it's from a reference image, and you've gotten rid of all the malware, and all that's gone. Makes the restores really quick and easy, and you can keep them small. So one of the problems you see is often that you'll start virtualizing, but then you move to the whole desktop. You're starting to move towards the VDI solution, but now you've just sort of moved your whole problem into the cloud. And if I compromise the VDI, then I get all your data. So you want to keep the box that can get compromised as small as you can, so the amount of damage they can do to the stuff in that box is minimized. If they compromise your browser, they only get the browser, and only the stuff that you've done in the browser this session. They don't get the email and the rest of the systems. And then just making sure that the rebuild process happens whether or not you detect anything, right? You don't want to say, I'm going to wait until I see malware in this box to launch my restore. You want to say, okay, every time you close a tab, or every time you close the browser, or every time you're finished with your email, burn it down, start again, because there might have been some malware in there and you wouldn't know. And you can't count on knowing. And I think just from an architectural point of view, trying to reduce the amount of data that's floating around. When I was started Anonymizer, we actually called it the prime directive, was you will not keep data about your user's activity. Right? If it exists, it can be stolen. If you've got logs, if you've got any kind of data at all, it can get out there. Whereas if you design the architecture from the beginning to not have that kind of information, then the hacker can't get it. Or, the government can't come along and do to you what they're doing to Apple and insist on you try to reverse engineer things out and, give them a back door. Well, if it's not there, you don't have those kind of leaks. So that's all the time I've got, I think. Thanks very much. I really appreciate your time. And do we have time for any questions?
So just like to thank Lance for your valuable knowledge to share with all of us. And on behalf of BSides and Fitbit, we'd like to offer you Fitbit. There we go. Sure. All right. And thank you, folks, for joining. Have a quick announcement. So there will